afternoon, everyone. My name is Soumya Paul. I'm a Health Promotion and Improvement Officer here in CHOD NCC. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the second webinar of our October Staff Health and Wellbeing Month series, which is run in conjunction with Human Resources for your health and well-being. Mental health, physical health, and emotional well-being were identified as the top topic preferences by the staff during our survey, and a good number of staff suggested Dr. Porrick Dunn as a speaker. I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Dunn to our lunchtime webinar today. Dr. Dunn is a senior lecturer based at the Center for Positive Health Sciences in RCSI. Dr. Dunn is now going to discuss thriving in the workplace using lifestyle medicine and positive health science, the importance of birth, bed, and the breath. If you have any questions for Dr. Dunn, please pop them into the Q&A feature and we'll try and get to them at the end. And if you're on social media and you would like to tweet this event, you can do so by using the hashtag StaffHealthDNCC. We'll also have a survey at the end of the webinar, and by completing it, you will be entered into a draw to win a €25 one-for-all voucher. Without any further ado, I'll now hand you over to Dr. Dunn. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Soumya, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm speaking to you from a very wet and rainy Kildare, so I hope wherever you are, there's a little bit of sun peeking out through the clouds. But if not, it doesn't matter. We're going to talk a little bit about buzzwords like resilience and burnout, but really what we're talking about is evidence-based practices that are simple, straightforward, that we can all kind of adhere to as best we can on a daily basis, that promotes flourishing and thriving as a human being. So that's really what I'm going to talk to you about today. There's a number of key things that I'm going to talk about, but really the most important is how you test how you're doing at any given week in the working year. And that's really about testing your burnout status. And this won't be a negative presentation, hopefully, but it's still really important to test this out. And hopefully that'll become clearer as you go through. So if you fall asleep halfway through this presentation, I'm reminding you that there's one slide that's the most important, and that's about testing your burnout. Okay, so my name is Porrick Dunn. I'm from the Center for Positive Health Sciences in the College of Surgeons. And initially, many years ago now, I trained to be an immunologist, so research scientist. So I worked at a number of different universities across Europe and the UK and Ireland. And then about 15 years ago, I retrained as a psychotherapist and a counselor. So I've got a very small private practice to keep me plugged in and grounded. And I'm very interested in the interface between mental health and physical health, including how we interface with our social environment and the physical environment that we live in. And I'm very much interested in lifestyle medicine. So I'm a registered lifestyle medicine professional with the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And I'm also very interested in coaching, especially coaching that can be transferred onto a digital platform that can be scaled up to help as many citizens as possible. So that's a little bit about me and my background. In terms of the center that I come from, so it's a relatively new center. We started in really the very early days of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, which was actually good timing because I think a lot of people needed supports and resources that we were providing. We continue to provide in the center. Throughout this talk, and hopefully you'll have access to PDFs at the end of this, you'll find little QR codes. So feel free to take a picture of that QR code and it'll bring you directly to whatever link I'm talking about. I know we have links, or you'll have links in the chat portion as well at the end of the presentation today. So in terms of the Center for Positive Health Sciences, you might be wondering what actually positive health sciences actually mean. So really what we're talking about here is what we believe is this continuum of health. So the original definition of health provided by the WHO that's actually beginning to change now, and I believe a new one is about to come out imminently. But the original one that came out around 1948 is kind of inadequate. It's talking about health being defined as the absence of disease. And that's not really realistic in terms of the 21st century. So we know now that the biggest killers globally are not infectious diseases anymore. Even though we have come out of a pandemic, the biggest killers in the 21st century are non-communicable diseases. that are largely mediated by lifestyle. So that would be certain cancers like lung cancer caused by smoking, for example, skin cancer caused by exposure to UV light from the sun, but also heart disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, mental health disorders, lots of things like that that can be prevented by lifestyle. Type 2 diabetes is we can throw in there as well. So prevention is key here. And in terms of what we focus on, I'm showing you a continuum of health here. And largely speaking, modern medicine and science, especially sciences in the healthcare professions, have been focused on really the disease business. And that's absolutely fine. It's where we needed to be, and we continue to need to be. But we're talking about really tackling acute conditions, like, for example, infections, and accidents and injuries, and bringing an individual from pathogenesis, let's say a disease state from -10, let's say to 0. So we're trying to cure these diseases or fix the individual injury, whatever that might be. And that has really been defined as bringing someone, as I said, to that functioning state and 0. And that's where traditional healthcare, broadly speaking, is at the moment. Now, and not just us, obviously, many individuals across the world are interested in bringing an individual not just from a functioning state, but into a thriving state. So, how do we get human beings into a thriving state, and what's the scientific evidence behind that? And that's really one of the areas we're invested in the Center for Positive Health Sciences. So, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. We need traditional healthcare to be combined with this thriving element of healthcare. And how can we get human beings, in spite of how old the human being is, in spite of diagnosis of a chronic disease, for example, in spite of your geographical location, in spite of whatever membership you are of a socioeconomic group, how can we get human beings to move not just from a languishing or disease state to a functioning state, but to a thriving state over here on the right? So we believe there are a number of different elements that can be combined in terms of an evidence base and research and interventions that can move a human being into what we call salutogenesis. And it's a focus on well-being, and not fuzzy well-being, but evidence-based well-being. So we believe that elements of positive psychology, which is the psychology of how humans thrive in spite of negative circumstances. And if we combine that with lifestyle medicine, positive healthcare coaching, and behavior change science, that we can move human beings into this far right of the continuum here. But any of us may exist in this continuum at any different point, depending on our circumstances. So that's a little bit about positive health sciences. And I mentioned that really one of the legs of the stools of positive health sciences is lifestyle medicine. And that's particularly what I'm invested in at the moment. I'm really fallen in love really with lifestyle medicine over the last number of years. There's nothing new here. This is thousands of years old. This is common sense. You're aware of all of these different aspects. My job today is just to remind you that lifestyle medicine is really important. Now, I'm going to say something really controversial now. Your head, including your mind and your brain, is attached to your body, and your body is attached to your mind and your brain. And in order for a whole health, you need to look after both. And especially if you want to look after mental health, you need to include the body in that picture. And medicine and science hasn't been great at including the mind and body together in terms of whole health. We are guilty of siloing out different individual aspects of health. So, for example, when we speak about mental health, we tend just to talk about psychological interventions. When we talk about physical health, we're talking about physical interventions. The reality is, in order to thrive as a human being, we need to focus on all aspects of our realities. And in lifestyle medicine, we've got 6 pillars. Again, nothing new here. So we start here at the top left. We're talking about nutrition. Now, it's more than nutrition. It's about eating well and better, as best we can, at least. And that means predominantly whole food that's not processed, mostly plants. And you don't have to be vegan. You don't have to be vegetarian, but you have to look after what you eat and eat whole, healthy foods. Then we move over into physical activity. And again, we're not just talking about exercise here. We're talking about daily activity, whatever that might be. We're talking about restorative sleep, which is really important in healthcare. And I'll go into that in a bit more detail later. Social connections, hugely important. Don't ignore them. They're a vital part of your health. Loneliness kills. We know that for certain. And you can be lonely within a crowd. And when we talk about cultivating positive social connections, we're not just talking about your immediate family or your friends. We're talking about your role in your community. So, do you have a role in your community? Are you connected to your community? Because that's part of your health as well. Avoiding risky substances, many see this as low-hanging fruit. Some of the biggest diseases and the impacts on our health services and individuals are down to really abuse of risky substances. And the two biggest players here are alcohol and tobacco. And we'll include vaping in the tobacco story. Obviously, there are other types of risky substances, but they're the two biggies at the moment. And then stress management, because as an immunologist, I can absolutely tell you 100% for sure that negative thinking will activate your immune system, which will activate your hormone system, which will activate your gut, activate your metabolism. And if that goes on long term, you're going to get into something that's called metaflammation, and that exposes you to developing chronic disease. So you've got to look after your stress if you can. Now, the beautiful thing about lifestyle medicine is a rising tide lifts all boats. So that means if you can look after your nutrition by eating maybe more veg, getting a little bit of more physical activity during the day, you're likely to sleep better at night, for example. And if you've got restorative sleep, you're less likely to be grumpy with your kids the next day. And if you're less likely to be grumpy, you're more likely to be a little bit more happy during the day, which means in the evening, you're less likely to reach for that second glass of wine, which means you'll get a handle more on stress. So that's what I mean by a rising tide lifts all boats. You improve one or two, the others start following. Now, it's not magic, it takes work and it takes perseverance. And that leads me to this toolkit, which is hugely important. And what's most important is there is no such thing in health and well-being as a one-size-fits-all approach that is utter nonsense. So, to give you an example, I'm fairly invested in meditation on a personal level, a professional level, and a research level. But that does not mean that meditation is going to be a useful tool for you in order to promote your thriving. Now, we know meditation works as a tool, and we know it can improve health in terms of psychological and physical health, but that does not mean that it's going to match and fit you in terms of your lifestyle, your stage of life. So therefore, the bad news in terms of developing your toolkit for thriving is that you're going to have to get out a pen and paper and investigate the options that are out there. And then you're going to have to test these options. And when I say test them, I mean don't just try them for 2 hours and say it's not for me. You've got to give it 4 to 8 weeks. Then, if it's not for you, that's fine. Put it back in the toolkit and take out something else and then engage in trial and error with that. So, this requires effort. It's not magic. Many of these things, or all of these things I'm going to talk to you today, have an evidence base, but you have to find out which one works for you in terms of building your kit. This is hugely important. So, it requires effort and it requires planning. Now, step one in building any toolkit, so if I put my psychotherapy hat on in terms of mental health, awareness is absolutely key. It's the first step in the foundation to mental health. If you're talking about physical health, awareness of what's happening in your body is absolutely key. So we're talking about combining both. So therefore, you have to pay attention and enhance your awareness about what's happening in both. Now, most people don't value their bodies. So we tend to treat the body like a donkey that we ride around on, and we whip it and whip it and whip it. And then when it is in pain or starts grumbling, we start giving out about it, and then we just reach for the paracetamol. The reality is you need to pay attention to your body. Now, I'll give an example of this. So when I'm stressed, I tend to grab my shoulders and push them up towards my head. Now, if I do that for long enough, that's going to create tension in the muscles of my shoulders and the back of my neck, which I know from personal experience can have an impact on my back, which can have an impact on my right knee, which can have an impact on my heel. And in the past, I've gone to a podiatrist and said, I've got a problem in my right heel. Can you fix it, please? When really the problem is stress that's emerging from me pulling my shoulders up. So I had to learn to pay attention to my body and to be aware of when stress is impacting my body and notice if the muscles in my shoulders are tensing and consciously relax them. Now, that might sound like a simple and obvious thing to do, but we tend not to do that kind of thing. So you need to pay attention to what's in your mind and what's in your body. Now, you can engage in many different practices to pay attention to your body. The one I recommend is called the body scan. There are thousands of examples out there online. You don't need to be guided, but it can help at the start. You can do it yourself. You just check in with your body piece by piece. Start with the toes on your feet, move right up, check in. If you find something that's tense, sore, or a bit stiff, consciously relax it if you can, and make a mental note that something is emerging there. In terms of the mind itself, yes, you need to pay attention, and we'll show you different ways of doing that as we go through this presentation, but you need to pay attention. One of the things that emerges in burnout, for example, is that the inner critic starts to rise in volume. And the inner critic, we all have it. It can be nasty, where it's usually semi-conscious. So it'll start to rise. It'll start to say things like, oh, you're a bit of a fraud in work. You're going to be cut out. You're not as good as you think you are. You're going to fail, or you look terrible, or you know the type of language I'm talking about here. Be aware of the inner critic. That's one of the first canaries in the coal mine in terms of burnout. Okay, so I usually ask this question when I'm in a class with people and when I'm talking to healthcare professionals. Maybe it's not appropriate in this context. I usually ask for, I'll do a poll and immediate feedback. We probably won't do that today. But usually when I ask this question in terms of medical specialties, so we're talking about emergency medicine, respiratory medicine, that kind of thing. I'll say who's the most burnt out and who gets away scot-free in terms of burnout. And we're talking about medics and nurses and everybody in the healthcare service, right? And usually people say, well, the most burnt out are emergency medicine and the least burnt out are dermatology. And I get that everywhere I go. Poor old dermatologists get it in terms of they get away scot-free. And the reality is nobody gets away scot-free. Emergency medicine is at the top. Psychiatry is actually at the bottom and dermatology is lower down. But the reason why I show this slide is because in healthcare, nobody gets away. And that includes admin, clerical, everybody in healthcare. Nobody gets away from being exposed to burnout because it's a difficult sector to work in. So even if you're at the bottom of the pile here, you can see here, and this is just physicians, you're talking about up to 40% will be experiencing serious levels of burnout at any given time. So burnout's a serious thing. You got to pay attention to it. If you're watching this right now, you have to pay attention to it too. Now, I usually provide a picture of a frog here. And the reason why I provide this particular picture of a frog is that there's an old wives' tale about getting a frog, putting the frog in a pot of cold water, put the pot on the stove, turn the heat up, and the poor old frog will stay in the water as it boils until it dies. Now, nobody's going to do that to a frog, and it's probably an old wives' tale. But the point here is that you can become that frog in this analogy if you don't pay attention to what's happening in your mind and your body, because burnout is sneaky, it's insidious, it creeps up on you very, very slowly. And before you know it, the water is boiling around you. So you need to pay attention. So how do you pay attention? How do you create an awareness of what's happening in your mind? And this is the gold standard globally. And this is what I mentioned at the start. If there's only one slide that you take away from this and you fall asleep right now, this is it. Maslach Burnout Inventory, created by Christina Maslach, who's a global expert in this field. This is the survey you need to engage in. Put a reminder in your phone. Do this every 6 months until you retire. It's going to cost you about $15. It's worth every single cent, penny, whatever you want to put into it. If you're not immediately in healthcare and you're not dealing with patients or clients or service users on a daily basis, there are other variations of the same kind of survey on this website. The bottom line, please do it and find out what it says. If you're in the amber or red zones, you need to do something about it, and you really need to get your Thriving Toolkit in action. So pay attention to this slide. It's the most important. So I usually bore people to death with this well-worn aviation analogy. You've all heard it before. It sounds like a cliche, but it's actually a fact. Pay attention to it. In the case of an emergency, as the air stewards always say at the start of a flight, put on your own oxygen mask first. So many of you watching this are probably in a leadership position. Many of you may be parents. It's a guarantee that you're a friend or maybe you're a partner, But the bottom line is, if you want to be good at any of those things, you need to value self-care more than your career or more than anything else, because you will not be proficient in any other area of life if you don't take care of yourself mentally, physically, socially, and in your environment. So a question I'm usually asked about burnout is, how come if we get 6 employees and we put them in a room and we expose them to a stressor, how come 2 of them will develop burnout and the other 4 won't? And that's a very complicated question with a very complicated answer. And there's a whole myriad of reasons. It's got nothing to do with strength. It's got nothing to do with your capacity to bounce back from things, although it can be. It's actually about a whole myriad of things, such as epigenetics. If you haven't come across epigenetics, I would Google it and find out. It's about your position in your family, your socioeconomic group, your culture, where you're born in the world. It's your gender. It's your personality type. It's whether you're in poverty or not. It's whether you've got a social stigma or not. Huge amount of different aspects. And if you think you're stronger than the average person, you're probably wrong, because strength doesn't come into it. We'll find, or we could find, the correct type of stressor that will put you in a burnout zone as well. So everybody is vulnerable to this stuff. But one of the things, especially in healthcare, that makes an individual more susceptible or vulnerable to burnout is personality type and whether you like to control reality or not. Now, I'm a little bit of a control freak. I'll hold my hands up. I admit to that. I'm much better these days, but it's still part of my personality. This makes me more vulnerable to developing burnout. Some of you out there don't need to do a test. You already know how you like to control life. However, if you're unsure, there's a little test here that you can click on, and you'll have the access to this, as I said, in the chat or the PDFs. But the bottom line is, this is called the locus of control. We don't have to get caught up in the terminology here. But if you want to avoid burnout in the long term, you need to stay in your circle, which is right in the center. Now, if you're in a leadership position, you might be able to pop your head out of your own circle very briefly into a sphere of influence where you might be able to influence people that you're leading. However, in general, stay in your own circle. The more you come out into the other circles, the more likely you are to be more vulnerable and susceptible to burnout. So there's only one thing that you can control, and that's your reaction to your reality. And that's what you need to do. Now, before we go into the toolkit itself, I want to put in one caveat here. And usually when I'm giving a talk to anybody in the healthcare system, usually I'll get somebody who gets fairly angry and they'll stand up and they'll say, listen, stop talking about burnout and interventions for me, and stop talking about yoga at lunchtime, and stop talking about all these well-being initiatives. What you should do is fix the parking first or fix the HSE first. Now, that's a valid response. And I'm not for 1 second saying that any of you as individuals are responsible for burnout, that there are dysfunctional organizations out there. Dysfunctional leadership can exist. We all know that. And we're not saying that you're responsible, but at the same time, it's unlikely that you're going to change whatever dysfunctional system you're working in. And I'm not saying your one is dysfunctional, but all I'm saying is that if you are in an environment that is creating or providing the conditions for burnout, that you still need to do your best to withstand those things and make yourself a little bit more resilient. Because the reality of many of us is we have to pay mortgages, we've got families to look after, we have to pay the bills. It's nice to have money, so not all of us can change jobs. So we need to sometimes stay in these jobs that are difficult. And if we are going to stay in these jobs that are difficult, we need to look after our health and we need to build our thriving toolkit. So how do we build it? So what I'm going to say to you today is, by the end of this week, I want you to have a pen and paper. Don't think you can just think this in the top of your head today, where it's Wednesday, and it'll fall out of your head by Friday. I can guarantee it. Get a pen and paper or get your laptop, your phone in the notes section and put your plan down and make a plan to engage these things. Remember, trial and error, see what fits you. If something doesn't work after 8 weeks, put it back in the box, try something else out. But the bottom line is, I need you to have picked at least one element from these 4 boxes here, at least one. Now, this is not an exhaustive list in each box. There are many, many other things. I'm just pointing you in a general direction. So if there are things in this box that you think would work for you in terms of grounding, looking after your body, go out there, find it and test it. But make it small, achievable, manageable, make it time bound. You know about SMART goals, and make it measurable. So you should be able to know whether you're making progress or not. So we're going to give you some examples here. Pick something from the grounding box, pick something from the creating awareness of what's happening in your body in your head box, look after your body, and then look after your social relationships. So pick something out of those. You'll have this picture anyway. You can look at this, but get a pen and paper and pick one from each box, please. Now, I'm just going to give you an example of my current one today. So at the moment, and bear in mind that this is flexible, right? So if you bumped into me this time last year, my kit would be different. But at the moment, I am practicing more breath work than I normally would. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I have an Apple Watch. My Apple Watch tells me that my heart rate variability is not great at the moment. And I know from the scientific literature that if I engage in breath work, I can improve my heart rate variability. So I'm practicing breath work right now on a daily basis. I routinely test my burnout using the MBI because I've experienced burnout in the past and I don't want to go back there again. So I test that out every 2 months. If you bumped into me 5 years ago and asked me to eat some broccoli, I would have said, no, not really interested in the old veg, which is terrible, I know, but that's the way I was at least 5 years ago. I'm much better now, but I still need to up my intake of leafy greens. And I'll give you a bit more info on leafy greens in a few more minutes, but that's what I do. So every day, and I'm not the biggest fan of leafy greens, but I still introduce it every day because I know it's important for my physical health. And then finally, I have breakfast with my dad every Sunday morning because it's important to cultivate these relationships. So that's an example of me. Forget about me, put your own plan in place, pick something out of each one of those boxes and put it in place. Really important. So I'm going to give you some examples here in a bit more detail. And again, these are only examples. You can go out and find your own. And where we're going to start is the breath. As I said, the breath is one of the things that I'm engaging in at the moment. If you are into yoga or breathing exercises in general, you will know that there's a myriad of different exercises out there, many of which have a scientific base behind them in terms of how they work. So I'm just giving you one of them. There are lots of different types out there. I'm giving you one that I practice personally, and I know that works. Okay, so why would you bother breathing at all? Or is that a stupid question to ask? And don't we all breathe anyway? Yes, we do. But I can guarantee that if I saw you in terms of a psychotherapeutic process and you were suffering from chronic anxiety, I would be able to hear it in your breathing as you were sitting in front of me in the room because you would be engaging in shallow inhalations with more of an emphasis on inhalation as opposed to exhalation. And why is that? So this is down to what's called the respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So when you inhale, your heart rate goes up imperceptibly to you and you activate the sympathetic nervous system. Now, you don't have to remember that, but what that means is you're activating the accelerator in terms of your fight or flight response. So up we go, and that's okay if you're breathing normally. And then when you exhale, you're activating the brake, which is the parasympathetic nervous system. And down goes the heart rate. And this is an example of somebody meditating. So we've got this beautiful little curve of nice inhalation where the heart rate goes up, exhalation where it goes down. Now, if you were in work and you were busy and you're a little bit stressed, you're not going to have this pattern of breathing. You're not going to have this pattern of heart rate. It's going to be way more jagged with much more of an emphasis on inhalation than exhalation. To give you an example of how humans and animals know how to short circuit this, if any of you have kids right now, or you can remember when you were a kid, you remember something called the psychological sigh. So I'll give you an example of what it sounds like. So imagine you're with your son and daughter, you're in the supermarket, they want a bar of chocolate, you don't want to buy it for them because you know it's not great for them and it's not their treat day or whatever it is, and they fall to the floor crying. And they'll engage in a crying like this. Or I certainly have a couple of dogs here who do this every now and again for no reason at all. That's called a psychological sigh. That is the system trying to shut down and calm it down. And what it is it's a sharp intake of inhalation followed by a long exhalation. And that's putting the brake on. So that should be a clue in terms of how we need to breathe when we're in an anxious state, but also how we need to breathe generally. So how should we do it? So we need to breathe through our nose first. Now, there's a reason why you have a nose. There's a reason why there's hair in the nose. And there's a reason why hair is attached to those epithelial lining on the inside of your nose and your nasopharynx, because those cells produce nitric oxide, which expands your blood vessels. And if you expand your blood vessels, you get more oxygen into your lungs eventually, which is good for you. It's good for you mentally and good for you physically. So breathe through your nose and not through your mouth. Now, I know there are exercises out there that talk about the mouth, and that's all great, but I'm talking about the nose. In general, breathe through your nose, please. Breathe light, slow, and deep in through your nose, and use your belly to practice this kind of breathing. Now, I've put an example here of 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. That's just an example. You need to find out what suits you in terms of your preferred cycle. My preferred cycle is about 8 seconds in, 8 seconds out. Find out what yours is. The bottom line is equalize inhalation with exhalation. So accelerator, brake, nice and smooth. This helps balance your system, including your brain, your mind, and your body. If you're experiencing anxiety, so if you're in the heat of battle and something bad is happening, or you've got insomnia, so let's say you're waking up between 2 and 4 a.m. and you're overthinking, this practice will short circuit that relatively quickly. So 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, and then hold the breath for 5. And what that's doing is it's putting the foot more on the brake. And you'll know this is working because you'll experience saliva coming into your mouth, and that's the parasympathetic nervous system. When the sympathetic nervous system or the accelerator is on, you'll get a dry mouth. So you would have experienced that. Remember being in school, teacher asks you to stand up and recite a poem. You've forgotten to learn the poem. Your mouth will go dry immediately. The converse is also true. When you practice this type of breathing, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system. You'll get saliva being produced in your mouth. That's how you know it's working. Pay attention to breath work. This is a fantastic book on the left if you're interested in this kind of stuff, but it's fairly scientific, but it's really there, all the evidence, fantastic, by Patrick McKeown. Okay, number 2, and one that many people ignore and think there's no real research or science behind it. That's entirely wrong. This is a massive emerging field in research and science. This is an example from one of the biggest research publications out there, which is Nature. And this is from Nature 2021, and it's a cover picture of the article, which shows bugs that live in your gut playing a video game that it's your brain. So in other words, these guys are controlling your action, and particularly your mood. So the bugs that live in your gut, and there are as much bacteria, yeast, fungi that are all good, that live in your gut, as you have human cells in your body. Trillions. And sometimes when you have an urge to eat a salty snack and you go to the cupboard looking for a cracker, you think you've made that decision. You haven't. These bacteria have made that decision for you. They're telling your nervous system and your metabolism that that's what they want to eat. So these guys are hugely important for health. I've called them psychobiotics here. It's not just me that's calling them that. The reason why they're called psychobiotics is because they can influence your mood. So if you're nice to them and they grow properly, they'll contribute to good mood. If you kill them by various different lifestyle activities, well, then your mood can drop. So they're directly associated with your mood. How do we know that? Lots of research has been done in this area. I'm not going to go into detail here. These were the initial research examples that were done, where scientists stressed animals in a cage. I know it's not nice, but this is what was done. Stressed animals in a cage, and then removed their microbiome, so the bacteria that live in their gut, and transferred them into happy mice who didn't have any bacteria in their gut. And that anxiety and stress was transferred immediately into those new animals. Those new animals started displaying signs of distress and anxiety just with that transfer within 24 hours. So this suggested to scientists that somehow the bacteria that live in our gut, not just the bacteria, but the other organisms, that they have a role to play in our mental health. Now, they're not the only game in town, obviously, but they contribute to it. So it's really important. I'm an immunology nerd, so I like this stuff. And I'm just giving you an example here. You don't have to get bogged down in the detail. But the bottom line here is I'm giving you one example of billions of interactions that occur in your gut on a daily basis. So imagine you eat some dietary fiber in the form of the humble cabbage, and that goes down into your intestines, and bacteria that live on your gut lining, they digest those fibers because you can't. They're called oligosaccharides. They break them down into many things. One of those things is called butyrate, which is a neurotransmitter, which does many things, including indirectly put a foot on the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the brake. So that should give you a clue on how these bugs are involved in your mental health. But they also balance the immune response. So they keep the immune response at bay, which means you can have a happy, nice, balanced gut. That's just one example of billions of interactions. One of the other questions that people ask is, so for those of you who remember from your biology in school, or if you're healthcare professionals, you'll know this, the pH or acidic level of the stomach is extremely low, pH 1 to 2, which means if you put your hand in it right now, it would dissolve the skin and muscle off the bone within minutes. How do these bacteria get through there? And can they? And the answer is yes, they do. So if you consume them, they come out the other side. If you stop consuming them, they don't come out the other side. That's how we know they survive. So they do. Now, what do you do about these bacteria? How can you keep them happy? How can you keep their numbers topped up? So, number one, eat the food that they like to eat. And what do they like to eat? They like to eat complex carbohydrates called oligosaccharides that you can't break down, but they can. Where do you find this? You find this in what we call fiber. And where do you find fiber? In all the good whole food plant stuff that we like to eat, or we don't like to eat, but we need to eat. So again, I told you there's nothing new here. We all know this already, but I'm just reminding you, if you want to feed the bacteria that are responsible for many different aspects of your health, then you need to be getting these goodies into you on a daily basis. The more processed the food, the less chance you're going to have these oligosaccharides to feed the bugs in your gut. Now, the other thing you need to do is eat the bugs themselves to keep their numbers topped up. It's not that you'll have no probiotic bacteria if you don't eat this food, but it's better to top it up. Wouldn't you agree? So we're talking about fermented foods here. Me personally, I like kimchi, which is spicy Korean sauerkraut equivalent. This is sauerkraut here in the middle. Sauerkraut is called a synbiotic, which means it's got the bacteria in the food as well as the food that the bacteria like to eat. So this is cabbage, it's fermented, it's got the bugs plus the prebiotics. It's a perfect food. Get at least one of these into you on a weekly basis to top the probiotics up. Now, there isn't a supermarket in Ireland that doesn't sell at least one of these things. So there's no excuse. Again, trial and error, see what fits you. If you're interested in this area, beautiful book on the area. One of the leading global research centers in the world is the APC Microbiome Unit in Cork, and they contributed to this book. You don't have to be a microbiologist to read it. It's very interesting. It'll give you an idea of the current research and future needs in this area. And here's a QR code that'll bring you to where the book is. Okay, so very briefly then, I'm going to go through how the inner critic really contributes to burnout and how you can actually try and get a handle on it. It's really important for you to realize that bouts of negative thinking or worry can activate your nervous system, which can activate your immune system, your hormone system, and create gut dysfunction, among many other things. So you need to be aware that your brain will get a threat signal from this type of thinking. So you need to get a handle on this type of thinking if it's getting out of control. And one of the ways you can get a handle on this is something we call attention-based training. Here's a free 8-week program that you can access to that we gave to RCSI staff during the pandemic. And it's a very simple practice. You're sitting upright. It's not about stopping thinking because you can't stop thinking. So it's about disengaging from thoughts, memories, emotions, and sensations like an itchy foot on a second by second basis. And every time you get distracted by one of these things, you come back to an anchor. One of the anchors we're recommending is the breath. Another one could be what's called a mantra. A mantra can be just a selection of words that grounds you. So an example of a mantra can be, I am here now. If you say this over and over again, it will lock you down. There's nothing magic about it. It grounds you so that you can disengage from these things that distract you. You can't stop these things, but you can disengage. And every time you disengage, you're strengthening that part of your brain that creates greater control for you in your head. So you can't stop the inner critic, but you can disengage from it. How do you do it? Everybody can do this. You can escape into a cubicle. Everybody has 2 minutes. No one's going to ask you why you're going to the loo. Go into the cubicle, lock the door, set your timer on your phone or your watch, 2 minutes. Sit there as you're bombarded by thoughts and memories and an itchy foot. Return to your anchor. Your timer will go off, and that's the practice finished. Now, we know this works because we went into the emergency department led by Barry White a few years ago in St. James's with a longer version of what I'm talking about here. And we improve burnout, improve sleep, reduce stress, and balance the immune system. This is a lovely, accessible TikTok course, 6 by 2 minute videos produced by one of my PhD scholars, Jennifer Donnelly. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing that she's made. Check it out. It's really accessible. It will help you disengage from the inner critic, especially if burnout's beginning to emerge. Okay, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about today now is sleep. Really important and a big problem in healthcare or anybody associated with healthcare. So we don't have to get bogged down into the different cycles of sleep and things like that, and light sleep, deep sleep, and all the cycles, okay? But what I want to draw your attention to is that they're broadly speaking two phases split down the middle. You've got the early and the late. And it is exactly what it says in the tin. The early is about the earlier stages of sleep. So let's say if you go to bed at 10, fall asleep by 11. Between 11 and 2, you're going to be engaging in more deep sleep. As you progress through the night, the closer you get to waking up, it's more light sleep. It's more sleep that's associated with REM, rapid eye movement, and dreaming. Now, the earlier phases of sleep, broadly speaking, are associated with DNA repair, which has to do with protecting against cancer, cardiovascular repair, which has to do with heart health, and also different types of immune-based repair around your body. So really important if you're trying to recover from anything physical. We also know, so researchers in the University of Michigan in the US found a spike of heart attacks when the clocks changed in spring and a reduction in heart attacks when the clocks changed back in autumn. Now, that does not mean that a change in the clocks causes a heart attack. What it means is that people who are vulnerable to this kind of thing are more exposed when they lose sleep. So heart health and sleep, hugely important. The latter stages of night are really important for emotional regulation and for mental health. So if you're not getting enough sleep and you're experiencing burnout, this is going to cause a very vicious cycle because the latter stages of sleep are associated with what's called fear extinguishing. The clue's in the name here. So you need to pay attention to sleep. It's really, really important. And the American Sleep Foundation, for example, is just one body that shows how much sleep that we need. Okay. Now, Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of the UK in the 80s and early 90s, you might remember, maybe those of you who aren't as old as me, but she claimed that she could get by with 3 to 4 hours sleep a night as a Prime Minister. And she may have well have done that, but that's going to have a negative impact on your health. And is it any surprise that she developed dementia in her later stages of life? Because lack of sleep has been associated with dementia, unfortunately. So you need to get an adequate amount of sleep. You need to find out what that is, but it needs to be in a reference range, which is between 7 and 9 hours. So you may be in the 7 zone, you may be in the 8 zone, you may be in the half 8, you may be in the 9 hours sleep. It doesn't matter, but you need to be in that zone. So if you're getting less over a long period of time, it's going to be a problem. If you're a teenager, you need at least 10. If you're over 70, you need less sleep. But for everybody in between, you need to be hovering around this reference range between 7 and 9. If at the moment you're experiencing insomnia, so if you're hitting the pillow at 10 o'clock, for example, and you can't get to sleep until 1, or if you hit the pillow at 10, you fall asleep and you wake up between 2 and 4 and you can't get back to sleep, you've got insomnia of some kind, if it's lasting longer than 6 days, for example, then you need to do something about this. The gold standard is cognitive behavioral therapy insomnia. That is the gold standard. Try your best to stay away from sleep medication because they can damage your health over the long term. I would recommend that you strongly engage in these activities if you've got insomnia right now. If you don't have insomnia, that's okay. You can have a look at some of them. Maybe some of them you need to tweak, maybe others you don't. But rule number one, especially if you've got insomnia, your bedroom is for sleep and sex only. Full stop. That's the end of the story. Number two, get, if you can, some exercise in the morning. Now, you don't have to join the gym in the morning, but what you can do is, I don't know, get some kind of walk. If you've got a dog, bring the dog out in the morning. And as you're doing it, get your eyeballs exposed to the sun. Don't wear sunglasses for at least 10 minutes. Get that UV light in to hit the back of your eyeballs so that it sends a signal to your brain to reset your circadian rhythm. Hugely important. If you like your big pasta meals or big rice meals, try to avoid them after 6 p.m. if you've got insomnia, because large carbohydrate-based meals push sleep out. So that means if you have, let's say, a pasta meal after the kids have gone to bed at 8 o'clock, you're going to push sleep out. And that's a problem in insomnia. This should be a no-brainer for you here, but I'm going to say it anyway. Remove blue light-based devices, full stop. So most people go to bed now with their phone surgically attached to the side of their head. You need to get the phone away, get it from your bedside locker, get the TV out of your room, get the iPad out of your room. Anything that emits blue light is going to activate sympathetic tone. The sympathetic nervous system is the fight or flight response. It's the accelerator. It also is involved in increasing your blood pressure, increasing your heart rate, and blue light sends a signal to your brain to say it's wakey, wakey time. So get away from blue light if you've got insomnia. The other thing that's needed for sleep is your core temperature needs to drop by at least 1 degree for you to be able to sleep. So paradoxically, if you heat up the skin, you can get the core to drop down by a degree. And one of the ways you can heat up the skin is to have a bath or shower 2 hours before bed. The other thing you can do for thermoregulation, which is about dropping that 1 degree Celsius temperature core-wise, is to hydrate in the afternoon. So drink plenty of water so that your vasculature has enough water in it so that it can regulate your temperature for you. The other thing, if you're getting a lie-in at the weekends, for example, some people can't, some people can. But if you are and you've got insomnia, try not to do this. I know you feel like you need to sleep more, but if you do this, you will still offset your circadian rhythm. So if you've got insomnia, try to wake up the same time at the weekend as you do during the week, at least until the insomnia is solved. If you've got insomnia, no alcohol at all, full stop. Also, if you've got insomnia, no caffeine drinks at all, full stop. And that includes those sneaky energy drinks that include high amounts of caffeine. It also includes things like paracetamol that has caffeine in it. So just be aware of those things that have caffeine in it that you probably don't realize has caffeine in it, not just tea and coffee. So again, this is draconian, but it should help you if you've got insomnia at the time. So please reach out to us. Go on our site if you want. We've got lots of free resources. Check them out. We're happy to chat with people. But the bottom line is, as I said, the most important slide I've shown you today is to check your burnout status. Put it into your phone as a reminder. Do it every 6 months. You can't go wrong with that. And do it until your last day in employment. So thanks very much for watching. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Just going to stop sharing here.
Thank you, Dr. John, for an extremely informative session. It was really interesting to learn how important it is to pay attention to your body and the mind and the factors affecting the burnout. I was a little surprised to see the personality type on the list, and also the importance of disengaging from your inner critic. And also thank you for sharing and suggesting the resources. Now it's time for the question and answers. If you have any questions for Dr. John, please pop them into the Q&A toolbar. And please do it now, and we'll do our best to get through some of the questions. I'll jump into some of the questions we already have here. You mentioned mediation benefits. Are there any, sorry, I think it was meditation benefits. Are there any meditation in particular that you recommend, especially for children, as I think if we can get young children meditating, it will help them as they approach adulthood and in turn their work-life balance.
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's a really tricky one. So in terms of meditation, so the attention-based training program I talked about, that's based on meditation practices, so particularly concentration-based and mantra meditation. The TikTok videos I spoke about, I think kids can respond to those, but I think kids, if you know, it's very hard to get a kid to sit still, right? It's very hard to get adults to sit still. Um, I think one of the best ways to get somebody into the meditation space is to engage in the breathing. And you can, in fact, I've seen like teddies and things like that where you can press a button on the teddy and it counts for you in terms of inhalation, and then it counts again in terms of exhalation. And that's a form of meditation itself, even. So, broadly speaking, there are three different types of meditation. There's the concentration-based focused ones, and they're very good for balancing the inner critic, trying to get around that kind of thinking process, not stopping, but moving around it. Another one are the mindful based ones, which create awareness of the body. So I spoke about how important that is. And then the third one are ones that cultivate compassion for the self and for others. And when you cultivate compassion for self, you're also managing that inner critic. And you're also managing an area of burnout because compassion drops with burnout. But with kids, I think if you start with the breath as a focus, and just make it a kind of a game, I think that's a really good start. Or if you start with something like the body scan to make them aware of their bodies as they're moving through it, that's a very good introduction to meditation as well. But we don't have to call it meditation. We can call it anything you want. You know, it's just breathing and paying attention, really.
And the next question is, what would the optimal breaks in work to function well? Example, 30 minutes twice a day. And would walking at lunch be good or anything else that would improve thriving in work?
Yeah, I see. Again, I'm always reluctant to say this is what people should be doing on a daily basis because everybody is different, right? One thing that is clear from the research is that you need to get up and do something at least once an hour if you're desk bound. So you know you can do a little bit of chair yoga. You can get your heart rate up a little bit if you have a standing desk. That can be good as well. Not everybody has that kind of stuff. Movement is key, and regular movement is key. So that's what I wouldn't give a time bound thing, but I would say movement of any kind is really good. Um, and I would check out things like chair yoga. I mean, assuming you don't mind doing it among your colleagues if you're in an open based office, you know, but anything like that is going to be good.
And connecting with that question, those staff who are doing the shift work, you emphasize the importance of 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
Right.
So would it have the same effect if you sleep 7 hours during the day after the night shift? So is there any difference in sleeping at night and the day for those who are doing the shift work?
So first of all, my heart bleeds for anybody doing shift work. Um, it is extremely difficult. There is no solution that's been provided in the research context or interventions from for people who are in shift work. It is damaging. It is over the long period of time. And I know healthcare workers have no choice, which is why society owes a great deal of gratitude to healthcare workers because shift work alone is difficult, never mind the job that's been done during the shift work. What you have to treat shift work the same way as you would do with jet lag. So if, for example, you're traveling west, let's say you're going to the States from Ireland, that you need to identify your original wake up time and create new wake up times and sleep times, if that makes sense. And you need to adopt exactly the same amount of sleep. So for me in shift work, then, if you've been getting 6.5 or 7 hours when you weren't in shift work, you have to do your best to get the equivalent when you're on shift work. But that's really, really hard to do. So yeah, apologies. I can't give a good answer there because one doesn't exist yet, but it needs to because this is a huge important area.
Thank you. And the next one I would like to ask is building your own toolkit to pick a behavior change where I find it difficult, and most people I talk to find it difficult. It's easy to start off, but it's hard to stick to. Is there any evidence to suggest if you forcefully do it for say for a few weeks or few months, there is a chance that you can make it into a habit? Is there any research evidence?
Yeah. So first of all, so researchers at University College London have shown that the average amount of time that it takes to make a sustainable habit that sticks is 66 days. So that's the average. So you can be lucky and you can have that sticky habit at 20 days, or you can be really unlucky and it could be nearly a year. The bottom line is it depends on your personality. It depends on what thing you're trying to develop. It depends on how difficult it is. But you have to be prepared for at least up to a year to get something embedded like that. Habits become habits when there's no thought involved. They become impulsive like engagements. So just like somebody would reach for a cigarette, that's impulsive. If it's a positive habit, again, let's throw in meditation practice. You engage it without thinking, then you know it's a habit. But you need to persevere. There's a whole science behind this. Um, what I would say is the first step in generating a sticky habit is to plan, 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 plan. Have self-compassion for when you fall off the horse. And when you do, just get back up again. It doesn't matter how many times you fall off, get back up again. That's okay. Make it simple and achievable, manageable, measurable. So make it small at the start. Small changes for better health. That's really the tagline here. Make it easy to do. So, for example, if you're trying to develop a meditation practice in the morning, you don't schedule it when the kids are all up at the same time. If you're trying to schedule, let's say, a new walking or running habit, you make sure you've got wet gear in the car. You've got your shoes in the car. Make it easy. But the most important thing with a sticky habit is motivation, the meaning and purpose behind your doing it. If you don't have motivation or a strong meaning and purpose, it will just fail. So you need to find the emotion that's inside that's connected to this new habit. So for example, if you wanted to stop smoking, a really good, powerful motivator is, well, I would like to be alive to see my grandkids grow. That's very strong emotion. So we know that people don't really think about themselves in terms of quitting for stuff like that. But if you bring in other humans and emotions and really connect it, you're more likely to move in that direction. So it's a whole field. It's really, really difficult, but plan, engage in self-compassion, get back up on the horse. It doesn't matter how many times you fail.
Thank you again, Dr. Dunn, for your lovely presentation. And thank you everyone who joined us today. This webinar is recorded and is available for playback. It will be available on the Health and Wellbeing YouTube channel. And we have a full series of staff wellbeing webinars over the month of October. We would be delighted if you could join us. Please scan the QR code, which would appear on the screen shortly, to register for any of our future webinars. Our next lunchtime webinar is tomorrow, and which will be on how to approach the menopause and how to plan your health when you age, by Dr. Rita Galimberti. And before we wrap up today's session, we really appreciate your feedback. Please scan the QR code on the screen and complete the survey. And by doing so, your name will be entered into a draw to win a €25 One for All voucher. Good luck with that. And with that, we are wrapping up today's webinar. Bye from all of us.
Take
Have
care.
a good
Thank
day.
you.
Have a good day. Thank you.